Welcome to the first video in my Still Life series using pencil and art journal. Today we are going to be drawing a baby zebra cactus. So for this you will need art journal or paper, a 2HB pencil, an eraser, a photo or a real life plant, lots of patience, time, and your favorite creative music. So we're going to start by sketching a rough outline. Now, I had to darken the picture on this so that you could see it, but when you're sketching, you want to have a line that's so light you can barely see it. So this looks a little bit darker than it did in real life, but it didn't show up, and that wasn't very helpful. So for your sketch, look at what you're drawing and just make outlines of it. It doesn't have to be perfect. And remember that this is just for fun. I also make outlines of the shadows that I see. So my plant had a shadow. I made an outline of the shadow, an outline of the plant pot, an outline of the cactus. And I took my time. Once I liked what I had, I would darken it. I used my eraser lots to take away lines that didn't look right. But I wasn't too picky on being perfect. I used to do drawing and shading when I was a kid for hours, and it takes lots of practice to get it the way you like it, but it should never feel stressful. This is just for fun. So keep practicing, looking at the shapes, adding in your shadow, the outline of your shadow. You don't have to start shading yet. Getting the lines the way you like them. It's also really important to put in the line, the horizon line, or in this case, the table line. And when I did this, I realized they didn't really match up. So I went and got a ruler. And I put, as I was making my lines, I just didn't like how wonky they were. So I actually grabbed my handy dandy ruler. You can also use any straight edge. But just sometimes a ruler is nice for those background lines, just to get them nice and straight. So once you've got your lines in place and you have it the way you like it, remember this sketch is very light. It looks dark here, but it's very light. We're going to move on to the shading. We add shading because it gives our pictures dimension, which means it makes them look 3D. It makes them look more real. And you can add as much or as little shading as you want. When I shade, I like to turn my pencil and use the side of the pencil lead, not the point, and add very gentle layers. I don't press too hard and I don't put too much pressure on my pencil because otherwise it's hard to control what you create. You want to be patient and build up the layers of shadow as you go. So the first thing I do is I look at what I'm drawing. I look very carefully with my eyes and I notice where there's a shadow and I just color it in. Now don't worry about getting it perfect. This is just practice. What you see here is a result of many hours and hours and hours, maybe days of practice when I was younger. I used to draw things for hours. And the first thing I do is just color in those shadows, not pressing too hard. Noticing where the shadow might be darker. So you can see on the edge of the plant pot it was darker, and the shadow closest to the pot was darker than the shadow farther away from the pot. So I just notice and add layers of shading. I had some helpers here. You might see their fingers in a bit, but just keep adding little layers. Gentle, gentle, gentle shading, not pressing too hard. And you can see where it's darker, I go over it, and then I use my finger to smudge it so you don't see my pencil lines quite so much. And I use my eraser to clean up my lines, to keep the shadow crisp if it's crisp. If I want it to look like a really clear shadow, I would use my eraser around it. If I want it to be a little smudgy, I would just leave the smudges there. You are the artist. You get to decide. So wherever I see the shadows, I just color it in. Gently taking my time, noticing what my eyes see. For this one, I decided to color in the background. You don't have to. I thought it could be fun, so I did it. And you'll notice I go over it several times. Rather than coloring it in right away really dark, I just do several light layers of pencil, taking my time because this is fun. And I just want to practice. Every time you draw something, it gets a little bit easier. So going in different directions here with the background, I went across back and forth the first time, and then I went over it kind of on a diagonal, being careful not to scribble on my plant pot, and using my eraser when I need to. I was using the eraser on the back of my pencil, but I do find white erasers work better. But it's personal preference, so you do what works for you. I think I was helping Audrey with something here. Okay, back to it. So shading in my background, erasing any shading that might be on my plant. And then I started to add some detail to my plant. And again, looking with my eyes, it doesn't have to be exactly what you see. This is art. It's your interpretation. This doesn't look exactly like the plant I drew, but it's my art. So don't worry too much about getting it perfect. Worry about having fun and practicing noticing what you see and teaching your hands how to do it on the paper. So one side of the plant that faces away from the light is a little darker. So I added more shadows and heavier lines there. Then the plant even had a little shadow on the plant pot, so I drew it on. And there were shadows on the table where the planks of the table were. So I put those in. And little lines where the wood grain was. Whatever you notice, just add it in there. And then I went over and I noticed where the shadow might be a little darker. And that's where you build it up. So I would go back, go over those parts and build up that shadow, smudging with my fingers, just playing around. And don't get too worried about getting it perfect, because drawing is definitely a practice. And the more you play around with it, the more you play around with shadow, drawing whatever you can see and not being too worried about getting it perfect, the more your drawings start to look like real life. The more you're able to put on the paper what you see with your eyes. But definitely practice and don't give up. So smudging with your fingers is just taking your fingers and dragging them around the paper, kind of like on the shading, to smudge it. And it blends it in a bit so you see less and less of the pencil lines. And you can see from my background, I went over it in all directions in very light layers, kind of like we did with pastels, and then smudged them with my fingers. Now that I've got the shadows down, I'm going to darken some of the lines. So I'm going to go and look with my eyes, where do I want to darken the lines? So I wanted my plant pot to stick out a little bit more and be more noticeable because it was kind of blending into the background. So I went over and I darkened a few of the lines. The trick is, don't darken all of them. Just darken a few of them or parts of them where you see that there's a little bit more shadow. It looks more realistic if you kind of do this sparingly. So play around with, that means not everywhere. Play around with what you like what you think looks good, and darken those lines a little bit. Again, don't press too hard because we're going to soften them out by smudging them right away, but add a little bit of darker lines just to make parts of your picture stand out from the shadow. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to soften those lines we just darkened and add some detail. So I smudged them with my finger and with an eraser, and then I cleaned up the smudging by erasing wherever, if it went off into my background a bit, I took the eraser and I cleaned it up and just play with it. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is just playing and figuring out how you like to draw. When your eraser isn't working, clean it off on a clean piece of paper by just erasing on a clean piece of paper. I noticed that the lip of my plant pot was a little bit light, so I took my eraser and I actually erased the shadow around just the very corner of my eraser. I erased the shadow around the very top of my plant pot because that's what I saw, and it gave it a little bit more realism, and I liked it. And then I went and I softened out those lines, added shadows, and played around with it until it was the way I liked it. Drawing is really a practice of watching, of looking and observing, and slowly, patiently adding what you're seeing onto the page. And remember, this is something I've practiced for years and years and years. I actually haven't done it in a while. This was a special request from Gavin, so I decided to do this as my first drawing series, and I remember how much fun drawing and shading are, and now I want to just do it all week. So there will be more of these videos because I enjoyed this so much. But go over your drawing, spend some time with it, play with the eraser. Someone had grease on their hands and they were helping me with this. So there are parts that I can't erase, and that's okay because this is just for fun in my art journal. And I'm not too worried about, having it perfect. I had a lot of fun making it. And I was glad I had a helper. You can see I went on my cactus here and I just darkened up some parts of it. The parts that are facing away from the light, the parts that are in the shadow, just to make it look a little bit more 3D. And building up those shadows where they need to be. But again, this is just a practice of looking with your eyes and spending some time with this. And I really want to thank Gavin for suggesting this video because I had so much fun making it. And I hadn't done pencil drawing in about 7 years, and I had so much fun with this. So thank you. And I hope everyone watching this has some fun with it too. Don't worry too much about getting it perfect. Don't worry if someone gets grease on your paper and you can't erase the smudges. Make sure you sign your work and be proud of it. I would love to see what you made. If you send me a clear picture, I can add it to the gallery. Thank you so much for creating with me, and look forward to more drawing and shading videos coming in the next week and a bit. Anyway, thank you. Have a beautiful day.